Suffering is an action horror game set in a maximum security prison. These mysterious creatures start emerging from nowhere and slaughtering the prison population, and you're left to survive on your own.
You play as Torque, a criminal who's just been sentenced to death for killing his family. But the interesting thing about the Suffering is that as the player plays and the choices the player makes, that determines Torque's guilt or innocence in the crime he committed at the start of the game.
And actually, one of our earliest ideas was to have the nature of your crime dependent on how you played the game. So we're sort of not only determining what the future is, but also determining what the past is of the central character.
You have the choice to either do good or bad. You can shoot a guard in the head and steal his gun, or you can work with him, and the consequences kind of reflect.
I think we started out wanting to tackle the horror genre from a different perspective than other games have done it. A lot of the other games, it's all about resource management and sort of having a weak central character who you are just sort of barely surviving situations.
We were all big fans of the Silent Hill series and Resident Evil, but we had big problems with the core game mechanics in terms of the controls and things like that. And we're kind of like, wouldn't this be cool to have a horror game but with really good controls where you could run around and shoot guys and be empowered as a player? And so, from that we kind of started coming up with The Suffering, which was really to be an action horror game instead of a survival horror game.
We wanted to have a main character who was just slightly insane himself, and then playing into that sort of blackout aspect where he doesn't remember his own actions was the creature, where that sort of tied into the, well, when he's had these moments throughout his life where he loses control of himself and goes into this super adrenalized state where he's able to do things that he would not be able to do.
A lot of the story unfolds real time. You'll be running down a hall, guys are breaking through windows, people are talking to you in real time. You'll have flashbacks, imagery is presented to you while you're playing the game, not in cutscenes.
It's set on Carnate Island off the East Coast, and it turns out that over the years there's sort of been this tendency for the humans who have been on Carnate to commit evil acts against one another, whether it's the slave ship that wrecked there in the 17th century, or it's the witch trials they had there that didn't end so well, or the World War II base where there was sort of an unjust execution at one point that led to a court-martial.
A lot of the research we did was we took a lot of pictures, or we went and did a lot of photo reference of prisons on the East Coast. Some of the other research that Richard spent a lot of time doing were torture devices or torture methods and methods of execution. That's where a lot of the creatures kind of got their initial inspiration from, were actual methods of execution.
Setting the game in the prison allowed us to have the game in a real-world environment, which is itself fairly horrific and disturbing, and then tying all the creatures into various execution methods allowed us to give them a theme which was tying into a real-life horror. Then there were a lot of places that would tie into a prison pretty well, like if it was based on an island, then running around the woods on the island fit in, or the rock quarry you go to, which is where the original inmates built the rest of the prison out of the rock. So we wanted the player to feel like they were in the environment and really they were figuring out their own way through it.
The whole point of this game is to experience the fear of it, and you're not going to be scared in a game if you don't really feel like the world is real. You can flush the toilets, you can turn on all the sinks, and you can use the telephones. Everything kind of goes to that original design, which was to make everything very real and feel real.
We were trying to break new ground in a lot of areas, and I was trying to break new ground with the way that we would integrate the music and the sound effects. The idea that myself and Eric Gaho, the composer, came up with was to create palettes that would be based on the environments in the game. We contracted a few very unique musicians who build their own instruments, sometimes out of refuse, sometimes out of junk, and proceeded to bang on, bow, strike, drop, creating as much noise as we could with these elemental things, thereby creating like the raw material that would then become organized into the music. We tried to really think of it in terms of having different levels of intensity. So there's sometimes when it's a really quiet game, but it's also an action game. We couldn't just be footsteps in an empty hallway all the time, because on occasion it's all-out combat. So we had to be able to switch gears frequently, and I think that we were able to do that.
It started off as a third-person shooter, but then we actually added the ability to go into first-person to investigate the environment because the environment was so rich.
That was a really interesting experience because there's a lot of challenges involved in having both third and first person, but I think we accomplished it really well. You go in and you may spend a lot of time in third person because you can see a lot more and things like that. But then when you go into combat, generally, you can switch to first person, or if you want to look at something.
But what we found was players actually really like to play in first person, which was fairly controversial from a design standpoint. Usually you pick your style of game and then you stick with it. So when we came up with the first person mechanics, about 50-50 of the players really like to play in first person. And then most people responded to the fact that they like the choice to play.
The challenges in terms of development were interesting because the way that you open a door, for example, is very different in third person than it is in first person. In first person, you just sort of hit the button and you want to go through the door instantly. In third person, you can show a lot more of the personality of the main player. You can, for example, Torque will kick the door open.
People generally know when something bad is going to happen in a horror movie or in a scary game. You get the clues, but that almost works in the designer or the filmmaker's favor.
We're trying to create an action horror genre, and that goes with the story, the imagery, everything.
That was something that was interesting to me, was being able to explore real-life horrors that have a basis in historical fact, despite the fact that a lot of the game is supernatural. It also has this very real edge.
They're expecting it, and when you give it to them, they're still scared.
I think I'm safe in the light. You've got to get me out of here!